Hi everyone, good morning. We'll just wait for another minute or so to see if more participants join and then we'll begin the call. All right, Supriyo, I think we can start. We have a small quorum today. But before we do, just a quick briefing. So, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining the session today. The session will be taken by Supriyo Ghosh, who's our chief architect at ONDC. It will cover the details about ONDC's architecture, technical structure, and basic principles on which ONDC is built. Just before we begin, a couple of house rules. For smoothly executing this session successfully, security controls are in place, such as microphone and video are disabled for the audience. We encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. You can ask a question either on the chat box or raise your hand, but we will be taking all questions towards the end of the session. I would request everyone to please maintain decorum. Any malicious behavior is highly discouraged, and the user causing the same will be removed from the session. So we'll be monitoring the session throughout. You will be receiving ONDC resources such as a copy of the presentation, recording, and other resources. Requesting everyone to fill in the attendance sheet, which my colleague Janvi has shared on the chat box. You will be receiving an email in about 24 hours. Please mark your attendance so that we do have a record of your email and we can send out the email to everyone. And finally, this is a weekly call. So if you feel like you want to join again or any of your teammates would like to join, you can ask them to join on the subsequent Friday, which was um, 17th. Yeah, I hope you all have a good session. Supriyo, over to you.
Thank you, Meenakshi. You need to give me access to share my screen.
Right. 1 second. Just give me a few more seconds, Supriyo.
Okay.
All right, Supriyo, could you try now?
Yes, thank you. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, Supriyo, it's with you.
Okay. Okay, so I'll take you through the tech update. So that starts out with the founding principles of ONDC, a bird's eye view of what ONDC looks like, some of the nitty-gritty details, some resources which are available for participants that are new, haven't heard about ONDC, some of the things that we are working on, and where do we see ONDC heading. So the foundational principles of ONDC. So the reason we start with the foundational principles every time is because ONDC is designed very differently from traditional e-commerce systems. So ONDC is a decentralized network. So there is no center. ONDC is not a participant in the network. What we facilitate is interoperability between participants. I'll get into the details of how exactly we do that, but it is a interoperable decentralized network where ONDC is not a participant. Everything that we do that's open. So we have a pretty active GitHub page, and we have communication channels over Slack and all that. So whatever we do, that's available in the public domain. Our job as ONDC org is to facilitate other participants to be successful on the network. We believe in minimalistic governance. So we expect that the network will be self-correcting and self-governing, but there will be some tiered governance principles which will apply to participants based on their role in the network. Our job is completely focused on participants to make sure that they are successful on the network. If the founding principle of ONDC had to be described in one sentence, it would be democratization of digital commerce. And innovation, there are quite a few interesting things that we do in ONDC. I'll take you through some of those. So what does the network look like? So this is a bird's eye view of the network. So if you see, so I'll start with this dotted vertical lines. So what this does is it creates a logical partitioning of the network into what we call as different domains. So for example, there is hyperlocal, which is live today in grocery and F&B. There's logistics, which is also live today. There are newer categories which are coming in as domains. So for example, fashion, we are actively working on fashion, beauty and personal care, then electronics, home and kitchen. So these are domains that we're actively working on. There are other domains also that will come in. So mobility also, we have a live network in mobility, and agri also is something that's going to come in soon. Now, within each domain, there are multiple buyer apps, there are multiple seller apps. So if you look at buyer apps, they bring in the demand. So in other words, buyers, they access the ONDC network through buyer apps, and seller apps are the one which actually bring in supply by aggregating merchants. So merchants are the ones that actually process and fulfill orders, and they are aggregated by one type of seller app called MSN, which actually is more of a marketplace. And what happens is that any merchant that comes on board ONDC through any marketplace or through themselves, which is an ISN, their catalogs will be discoverable by any buyer who comes in through any buyer app. So this is the interoperability that we are talking about. How does that happen? I'll get into the details of that. Now, there is this component called the gateway. So what the gateway does is that anytime a buyer anytime a buyer comes in through a buyer app and sends a search request. So for example, if I come in through one of the buyer apps like PhonePe, I search for Atta. That search request goes to the gateway. Gateway actually broadcasts it to all the seller apps that have expressed interest in Atta or the category of Atta, which is grocery. And any seller app who has registered themselves as a grocery seller, they will be notified that somebody is searching for one type of grocery, and they get a chance to respond. Whether they actually do or not, that's up to them. But this allows the sellers or the merchants to become discoverable on the network. So discoverability of merchants, that's a key theme for ONDC. Now, today we are live in the network. So grocery, food and beverage, that's live. Bangalore, it's open, for everyone. So if you're in any pin code in Bangalore, you can access ONDC. There are multiple buyer apps. You can actually see the list of buyer apps on the ONDC website at ondc.org. It's open in Bangalore. It's also open in Delhi, Meerut, and there are other cities where we are doing a pilot, where we are running a pilot. So all in all, we are there in more than 85 cities in India today. Now, how do we see this evolve? So there'll be lots of merchants that will come in through coming through fewer number of seller apps, and there'll be even smaller number of buyer apps, and the number of gateways will probably be in the low single digits. So today we have one gateway. There could be another one in future, but it won't be too many going forward. So that's how we expect the network to evolve. Now, in some cases, the buyers could actually be human buyers. So for example, retail, you actually have a human buyer, like you and me, we can go and make a purchase. But in some cases, the buyer could be an API. So for example, the logistics buyer, it's actually driven by an API. So it's completely driven by an algorithm. So this basically covers the nuances of the network. Now, where are we live today? So we are in grocery, F&B, and all these new categories. So fashion, we are actively working on fashion, beauty and personal care, electronics. So anyone who is interested in any of these categories, request you to please get in touch with us. Now, this is the ONDC network itself, and it is so this is kind of expanded to show some of the other services that are available. So for example, I talked about the gateway, which broadcasts search requests to all the seller apps. Now, how does the gateway know whom to broadcast to? So that is through a component called the registry. The gateway, so registry is the only component which is owned by ONDC, and registry maintains a list of all participants on the network. So whenever the gateway gets a search request, they look up the registry, find out who are the participants or on the seller side, who have registered for that particular domain, and then they broadcast it to all of them. Some of the other services that will also come in is issue and grievance management, which will actually let one participant communicate an issue or a grievance to another participant. There'll be a reconciliation and settlement service. So again, there'll be different providers that will be available who will actually make the job of reconciliation and settlement a lot more seamless. Scoring. So ONDC is building a network rating system from the ground up. So what the rating system will do is it will create a rating for each participant on the network based on so every participant on the network, whether it's a buyer app, seller app, they will be rated based on their performance in the network. Open data ledger. So open data, what happens is if you look at the data security and privacy, today all the buyer data is with the buyer app, all the seller data is with the seller app, and they keep the data. There is a small amount of information that actually flows from the buyer app to the seller app. So for example, the buyer contact details have to be sent to the seller app because the order has to be fulfilled. But even there, participants are coming up with pretty ingenious ways of working around that. So these are like PII data. So we have to be very careful about this. But open data ledger, what happens is that data in some aggregate form. If we collect data in aggregate form from different participants and make it available in a distributed form so that other participants can get access to it, that will actually help ensure flow of value on the network. Just to give an example, the gateway, it's actually a nodal point in the network. It knows who is looking for what. So for example, last year in the month of May, which was actually the coldest month in Bangalore, if somebody was searching for winter wear, that kind of information would be available with a gateway, and that information in some aggregate form would be pretty useful to sellers and merchants in terms of deciding what to stock at what point of time. Now, similar networks similar to ONDC are also in the process of evolution. So, for example, there's a credit enablement network, the OCEN, that provides credit to small retailers and merchants, through an online process. So, in other words, small retailers and merchants who can't get credit from banks and other financial institutions, they can actually get credit through this OCEN network, and that process is completely digital. So once ONDC interoperability with OCEN network is established, anyone from ONDC, any retailer or merchant from ONDC will be able to avail of credit services through OCEN without having to register there. And we do expect similar types of networks will come up in future through with which we will have interoperability in place. Now, what are the building blocks for ONDC? So the interoperability that is established through a protocol. So the protocol actually has two layers. So there is a base layer, which actually provides APIs and models for digital commerce transactions. And if you look at any digital commerce transaction, it can actually be broken down into 4 discrete steps. There's a discovery, there's an order creation, there's a fulfillment, and there's a post-fulfillment. So there is a base layer. Now, on top of the base layer, there's a network enablement or extension layer. Now, the network enablement layer, it has features, and it enables features and functions that actually are required to get a network in place. So it includes things like grievance handling, policies, and we do have a lot of policies which are codified in the network. Open data registration, which is actually the registry where participants actually subscribe to get their entries added. Online dispute resolution, this is an interesting thing that we are doing, which is actually part of the grievance and issue management system. Now, considering the state of consumer courts in the country today, so ONDC will have a ODR service, which will be provided by independent providers in place, which will actually enable mediation and arbitration between participants before they decide to go to courts. And finally, the API contracts, which we actually establish, which we actually create, that establishes the interoperability between the different domains. So we have API contracts in place for retail, for logistics, and for all these new categories that are coming up. There'll be an API contract extension. So API contract, it defines the interactions that happen, interactions and the behavior that happens between different participants at each stage of a transaction. Now, some of the distinguishing features, it is an open protocol with community governance model. Now, verifiable decentralized identity. Now, this is an interesting thing. I mean, it will be, so all of you from the crypto world, and this is something that you'll be familiar with. So what happens is that the network endpoints are all public. So in other words, there are endpoints for the registry, for the gateway, and all the participants, they also have their endpoints which are available. How does a participant know that a request that they're getting from somebody else, it's actually from a genuine, it's actually a request from a genuine network participant, and the payload of that request has not been tampered in transit? Now, that is what we enable through a form of verifiable DID, which is actually key pairs that are used to sign the request. So what happens is that each participant, they have their own key pairs, and whenever they send a request, they sign it using the private key, and the public key is with the registry. So the recipient of that request, once they receive the request, they actually look up the registry, find out whether it's a genuine participant or not, and then using that public key, they try to verify the signature. And once it is verified, then they process it. So this is our version of the verifiable DID and the digitally signed bilateral transactions in place. So every request, every response that is sent, that has to be digitally signed through this mechanism. Bilateral negotiation through the protocol, this is something that will get enabled. Now, the reason this will be in place is because if you look at ONDC, it actually provides enabling infrastructure that brings together multiple participants. Now, one example is, let's say, collection of payments. Now, there are different participants, each of whom have their collection policies in place. Now, how do we decide who gets to collect the payment? Now, that will be enabled through a bilateral negotiation. Today, of course, we are running an MPP. We've set some ground rules saying that, okay, buyer app always collects, they settle it with the seller app. But in future, it will be opened up so that the buyer app and seller app can decide through a negotiation as to who exactly is going to collect the payment. Data privacy and security, that is built in by design. And global interoperability. So ONDC is designed not just for digital commerce in India, but also to facilitate cross-border commerce and be globally interoperable with similar types of networks that come up in future in other countries. Okay, so I'll get into some of the nitty-gritties of the protocol. So this is the base protocol. So these are the 4 discrete steps. There's the discovery, the order, fulfillment, and post-fulfillment. Discovery is the process where you can do a location-aware search and browse, in response to which the merchant publishes the catalog. Merchants can push offers that a buyer can avail of. A buyer creates a cart. Through the auto creation process, they create a cart, they get a code for that cart, they can do a checkout, they can make the payment. After that, they can even update or even cancel the order. Fulfillment and tracking. So this is where a buyer can actually track the status of the order end-to-end. Post-fulfillment is after the fulfillment has been complete, they can actually rate their experience for that particular transaction. So they can rate either the merchant or the or the fulfillment agency that actually delivered the order. Mapping the transaction flows to the APIs. So the APIs are asynchronous. They are server-side. And so here, if you look at it, it's fairly lightweight. Now the APIs at the top, the search, select, init, confirm, update, cancel. So these are all APIs which are enabled by the seller apps. And once a buyer app actually makes a request to these APIs, they get back a response through a callback, which is on search, on select, on init. Now, how does it work? If somebody comes in through a buyer app, they do a search for Atta. What the buyer app will do is create a search request and send it as per the format in the API contract to the seller app. Seller app will process the response, process that request, and send back a response for the catalog through the on search. So now the search and on search, that actually happens through the gateway. But once the buyer decides that they want to buy something from a specific merchant, then it becomes a peer-to-peer transaction directly from buyer app to seller app. So that is where first the buyer gets to create a cart, which is the process of selection, in response to which the seller actually provides a quote. Then there is a process of agreeing to the terms and conditions in init and non-init before the order is placed, in confirm, in response to which the seller either accepts or doesn't accept the order, in on-confirm. After that, the order can be updated. Update primarily can happen in the sense that buyer might decide to part cancel the order, seller might not be able to fill the entire order, they might cancel part of the order, or buyer might decide to return after the order has been delivered. Cancel and non-cancel, this is for canceling the entire order. A status, where you actually get to track the status of the order. Track is primarily for live tracking of the delivery executive, and this is primarily used in F&B. Support, where you can actually get the contact details for the merchant or the logistics provider who is fulfilling the order. And rating is where the buyer gets to rate the merchant or the logistics provider based on their experience. Now the protocol specs, these are all published on GitHub. There are Swagger Hub endpoints as well. Spec documents also available. So you'll get this deck, so you can actually see these links are available here. Now there's a tech quick start guide. I'll just walk you through this. So before getting started with the tech quick start guide, so we have a pretty active page on GitHub. So this is the name, ONDC official. This is our GitHub name. There are all these different forums here. So for example, protocol network extension, there's a pretty active discussion forum here. You might want to see, so you can actually participate in this. If you want your user ID to get added to ONDC, you can send it to us. We'll be happy to add you there. Now so all our repositories, everything else is here. So I talked about our specs being open. So everything is published here, even our reference apps. So we also have a reference app for ONDC. The source code is also available here. Okay, so I'll get to the tech quick start guide. So this is a guide that has been created quite some time back. This is going to be helpful for those of you who haven't heard about ONDC. Developing an app for ONDC. So this was created more than a year back by one of our earliest participants. So we have ONDC reference apps. So the reference apps, they showcase how exactly the protocol can be used. The source code for that is also available. So we have a mobile APK version, we have a web version, we have APK, we also have iOS version. The protocol specs on GitHub, that's here. Swagger Hub specs are here. Some of the spec documents are available. So things like how to cancellation, returns, replacements happen on ONDC, how to payments and settlements happen on ONDC. This is the auth header signing and verification, the digital signature that I was talking about. The signing and verification utility. So this is a utility which you can actually download and use it to generate keys, to sign requests, and to verify requests that come to you. So this actually has helped a lot of participants who used to initially struggle with signing and verification. Source code for our reference apps is here, and you can even see our APK here. So all this information is available for you. Now, the journey for a participant is you start out in staging. So staging is like the first stage. So staging environment, there's a registry, there's a gateway, the ONDC reference app is there. There are participant apps as well. Now staging, you'll be given an MVP. So you complete the MVP and give a demo to an ONDC team. After they approve it, then you'll move to pre-production. Pre-production is like a scaled down version of production, except that this is not live. There's no transfer of money or movement of goods. Again, you'll have the same things, which is the registry gateway, reference apps, participant apps, and in the live environment, you only have the registry gateway and the participant apps. So so every participant starts with staging, they move to pre-production, and then in pre-production, once they complete the MVP, there's a log verification that happens, and then after that, there's a QA process also happens to check the functionality of your app before we actually enable you in production. And before getting enabled in production, there are some checklists also which are available. So I think you can, so in our GitHub page, if you look at log verification, so there's a verification logs repository also. You can actually check the logs that participants submit, and this actually tells you what the API contracts also look like, because there's a compliance checklist also, but this is after you are in pre-prod and you want to move back to prod. So that is the tech quick start guide. Just give me 1 second. Okay, so what are some of the other things that we're working on at ONDC? So we have created a distributed catalog store, which is almost like a distributed repo. So what happens today is that if you look at a decentralized network, there are multiple participants, and there are different merchants under each participant, and more than 50% of the SKUs that they have are branded items. So for catalog compliance, there are some requirements. So for example, they need to have an image, they need to know the manufacturer's name, contact details, product name. So there are a set of keys that are actually mandatory. Now, we've seen participants struggle to provide their information, and that becomes a barrier to onboarding newer merchants quickly. So what we've done is we've created a distributed catalog repository, which is actually available on our GitHub. And so the distributed catalog repository, the intent is that it will be maintained by the brand owners, and that will provide a way for participants to actually use it to synchronize their catalog. So some of the things that they struggle to get, like a proper image or manufacturer contact details, they will actually be able to get it from the distributed catalog store and populate it in their catalogs. Now, if you see, one of the reasons why ONDC was founded was to bring in a whole new generation of buyers and sellers who've been left out of the mainstream of digital commerce so far. Now, towards that goal, what we want to do is enable next generation UX. Now, the digital commerce interfaces, all of us who used Amazon, Flipkart, and all that. So it requires a certain level of tech savviness, to be able to use those apps properly. But if you have to enable it for the new generation of buyers, who have not been using digital commerce so far, the UX has to be completely different. Now, this is something, it has to be more of assisted, or a guided experience that is provided to the buyers. So this is something that we want to bring in. Native Indic language support, this is very important if you have to bring in new merchants and new buyers who not been a part of digital commerce so far. Fast digitization of catalogs, if you have to onboard small kirana stores and others, how do we enable them so that their catalogs are digitized fast, and they are also able to maintain it live, not just catalog, but even an inventory system. And a lot of participants are coming up with lots of interesting innovations in these areas. Many of them are actually live on ONDC today. They've come up with real-time POS systems on a mobile, which maintains real inventory. So it's pretty interesting to see the kind of innovations that participants have come up with. Search is always going to be an area of innovation. So we've started with some restricted options in search. It will be slowly opened up so that we actually want to have like free text search with a proper search grammar in place. But search may not be only a buyer typing in text. It could also be through voice search, image search. Those kinds of searches also will be enabled. Distributed ledger, I talked about this. So distributed ledger for, let's say, open data for scoring. Online dispute resolution, this is the mediation arbitration that we want to enable for participants to resolve the disputes. Plus, a lot of these technologies, if you look at digital commerce today, anyone who is a part of digital commerce platforms or participant in digital commerce platforms, they pretty much need a pan-India presence. I mean, without that, it's a no-go for them. But ONDC will have all kinds of participants. We'll have large participants who have pan-India presence. We'll have small participants, who operate only in a few areas for a particular city. If you look at logistics providers, so for example, there'll be the Blue Darts, the deliveries of the world. There'll also be the small mohalla logistics providers. Now, for them to be able to provide efficient last mile delivery services, technology like route optimization or even maps, it's a pretty expensive proposition today. These are areas where we want to mainstream certain technologies. And even dynamic pricing or non-deterministic inventory management. Now, while these are available to high-end retailers, it's not available to the small kirana stores, the SME, MSME type of segment. So this is something that will actually help innovate, help bring in a lot of these participants into the digital mainstream. So just to summarize, distributed catalog of branded products, Indic language support, protocol-based negotiation, technology for small merchants, trustless digital commerce, verifiable transactions. Now, for the tech service providers among you, there are lots of opportunities in tech around ONDC. So one is SDKs. Now, ONDC reference app itself, that has an SDK. So there's an SDK for the buyer app, there's SDK for the seller app. Now, the whole promise of SDK is that it will fast track the onboarding of participants to ONDC. So if the SDKs can abstract the protocol implementation, all that the participants have to do is provide the value add on top of it. So for a buyer app, that would be the UX layer, and for the seller app, that would actually be the POS system, which sits on. It'll actually be the adapter, between their backend OMS systems and the POS systems which are in place. So SDKs, there is an SDK from ONDC. Now there are lots and lots of SDKs that are required. So I know other participants also building it, but SDKs will actually help fast track a lot of new participants into ONDC. So there'll be different types of apps. So in terms of buyer apps, so there'll be lightweight apps who might focus on a very specific category, or there could be super apps who do like multi-category experience. Intuitive guided buying experience. This is the next generation of UX that I was talking about. Decentralized ledgers for reputation, for open data, for promise, online dispute resolution, reconciliation, settlement services. There's also a requirement for some formal languages in terms of, if you look at API contracts today, I mean, in terms of behavior, we write it in English. If there's some way that it could be codified in future, I think that will be really helpful to automate it completely. So in the future, what do we see? So trustless digital commerce, even the registry, which is something that ONDC owns, we are looking at, we could probably make it decentralized someday. Verifiable transactions, verifiable transactions and SDKs, which abstract to the level of smart contracts, and even individualized negotiated contracts between buyer and seller, pretty much similar to how it works in the physical world today. Okay, so that's all for the presentation today. So we'll take questions. So we'll go in order. So I'll first start with any questions in the chat window, and then I'll then take questions from others. Okay, how money of the buyer is protected if some fraud merchant comes on board on the seller platform? Okay, fraud management, that's something that we are working on, but basically the seller platform is responsible for making sure that they verify the merchants that they bring on board ONDC. Catalog requirements document, kindly share links. There is a version of the API contracts which actually link to all these other documents, so which you should look at. I'm not sure if you've had access to that, but we'll publish it on Slack channels also. Your network is weak, please recheck. Sorry, what is weak? You're not able to hear me or see me or see the deck? How do we get the keys? Yeah, Sandeep.
Yeah, Supriyo, can I ask a question right now?
Yes, sure.
So I'm founder CEO of organization HiSave. We are backed by MasterCard, RuPay, Worldline, and ICICI Group is our client.
Okay.
What we provide is a unique proposition. We provide intelligence on a payment gateway transaction to the end customer, that which payment method is actually the best payment method to pay, so that the savings is the highest.
Okay.
We are first and patented. Having said that, we would like to lead the change. ONDC has triggered. You have presented an excellent presentation. All parts of the presentation is clear. We want to play a very dominating role in making this transformation and various transactions happening.
Sure.
How do we participate both on a Worldline is our online as our payment gateway. How do
Okay,
we participate as an intelligent payment gateway solution, both on seller side as well as buyer side?
sure. So first of all, welcome to the call today, and it's great
Thank you.
to hear from you. So what we will do is we'll connect you with some of the participants. If you look at payment itself today, right? It is something that is so payment infra is pretty well established, and today what we've said is that ONDC will facilitate. ONDC will do for digital commerce what UPI did for payments. And today, all the buyer apps and seller apps, they are the ones responsible for payments. I mean, they are expected to have a payment gateway in place. So what we can do is, we can connect you with other participants, so you can be a value-added service provider for them, at least to get started. I mean, I don't think we'll get into payments, but who knows what will happen. Plus, we're also working, on the financial services domain. So I think your expertise will be of a lot of value there.
Sure.
So what I'll do is,
LinkedIn also.
yeah. So what I'll do is, if you can, so Meenakshi, how do we take this forward? Okay. If you can just if you can just post your email ID here on the chat window, I'll take it up. Sandeep, is that okay? Okay, just give me 1
Yes, I
second.
have sent both my WhatsApp
Sure,
number as well as email ID. Supriyo, you can just send me hi on WhatsApp, so we will
sure.
stay in touch. I
Yeah, yeah,
really
sure. I'll do that.
honored to connect with you, and really glad that ONDC is taking this important e-retail revolution.
Thank you. Looking forward to working with you. Okay, so next question is, how do we get the keys to start development? So the keys, you don't need the keys. What you need to do is, so there'll be a participant profile form you need to fill up. You'll get added to the Slack channels. You have access to all our resources. You can, you can actually download that utility to generate the keys. You can get added to a staging registry and get started. So the process is fairly transparent. Once you get added to the Slack channel, it is, so you'll also get a integration guide that will give you a step-by-step flow of how you can get started. Fulfillment is managed directly by seller, for example, for large appliances and electronics. See, we support all options. So it could be fulfillment is done through the network logistics provider. Fulfillment is done, through offline logistics, which is the seller can provide fulfillment, or there could be also disconnected fulfillment where merchants, they order logistics services, which could be ONDC logistics providers or others. So all options are supported here. F&B agri startup, we have our own website now. How can we implement ONDC on website now? Then sellers to have the product catalog separately on each seller up, or by just onboarding our website, ONDC will be enough. So what happens is that if you get your catalogs, in the format that is required for communication over the protocol, as defined in our API contract, then you'll be able to onboard onto any seller app pretty easily. So you can actually you can actually work with one of the seller apps to get your catalogs in that particular format, and then you can use that format across any other seller app also. Can buyer platform cache search query or product data to make discovery of new products to users and personalize their experience? Yes, absolutely, you can do that. The implementation, does age of startup matter? Like we are just incorporated. No, it doesn't matter at all. Every user search query of the network is asynchronous. Yes, it is. So user search query means user. If you look at a user, they actually search on the buyer app. Now buyer app could have cached in catalogs, and they can provide like a real-time sync option. But the communication between participants over the network, that is asynchronous. So buyer app to seller app, that is always asynchronous. Okay, so any questions from anyone? Yes, Slack channel, you'll get, so once you fill up the network participant profile form, you'll get access to the Slack channel. How are search results? And sorry, what is this? How are the search results ranked? Search results, what happens is that every buyer app, they're expected to provide filter and sort options for the buyer to decide, in what order they want to see it. And if the buyers don't use that, the buyer apps can rank it whichever way they think is right, but they have to make it transparent to the buyer. So that's the position as of now. Difference between encryption public key and signing public key. So the signing public key is what is used to verify your signature. The encryption public key, so if you encrypt specific information, so that we are using right now for registry onboarding, and we are not using it for any request or response, because that anyway goes to SSL, and it is SSL between two trusted participants. So we are not using it as of now. And PFP, is network torrent supported, or is everything exclusively over a gateway? No, it is. So torrent, we are not supporting. So every search request and response has to be over the gateway, but every other request and response has to be peer-to-peer. What is the role of encryption public key? How do we use it? We use it for getting added to the registry. So the registry has a subscribe API call, but that is not for staging. It is for pre-production and production. So we are using it for that now. NP form is filled, not received access to Slack. Let us know when you filled it up so we can follow up. Okay, what's the average timeline for any seller to get onboarded? Can catalog sent in XML Express and API? No, catalog has to be sent as per the API format, and that is a JSON payload. So it has to follow that particular format, because buyer apps have validations in place. So if the catalog is invalid, then they will reject it. Share a copy of the session that you'll get. Okay, any other questions from anyone? No, I think there's a separate NP profile form which you have to fill up. So the attendance sheet is not the NP form.
Yeah, so Supriyo, I will just add on here,
Yeah.
after filling up the attendance sheet, we will add them to the respective Slack channels within 2 days. I mean, Meenakshi will do that.
Okay. Okay, any
In
other
case
questions?
there are no questions, yeah.
Encryption public key, you can, so just check the documentation. You can actually generate it. So, but that will require when you get added to the pre-prod environment. So there's a particular, so that it actually uses the X255 online key exchange format. So you can use it, you can generate that using any utilities which are available. We have some documentation of standard utilities that can generate it. Sample JSON response that you'll find out from the integration guide. Okay, Rajnish, hi. Rajnish, you can ask a question.
यस सर सर जैसे कि अभी आपने बताया था प्री प्रोडक्शन के लिए यूज होगा इनकेप्शन जो पब्लिक की है, बट जब हम आपको मतलब रजिस्ट्री में सेंड करेंगे तो उसके अंदर एक फॉर्मेट दिया हुआ है, एक फॉर्मेट जेसन फॉर्मेट आपको हम शेयर करेंगे रजिस्ट्री के लिए, तो उसमें इंक्रिप्शन की देनी है, तो मेरे को समझ नहीं आया था मैं जनरेट कैसे करूं उसे।
अभी वो
पब्लिक
यूज
की और
नहीं हो रहा है,
प्राइवेट की तो
स्टेजिंग
समझ
पे,
में आ गया मुझे।
स्टेजिंग पे वो अभी यूज नहीं हो रहा है।
अच्छा, स्टेजिंग पे यूज नहीं हो रहा, बट
नहीं।
सर रजिस्ट्री के लिए मेरे पास डॉक्यूमेंट आया था रजिस्ट्री के लिए,
जी।
उसके अंदर एक पेलोड दिया होता, उसमें दिया हुआ था कि मतलब आपको शेयर करना है उसे, मतलब एन्क्रिप्शन पब्लिक की के साथ।
हाँ,
तो that's why मैं पूछ रहा था।
तो अब ये हमारे गिटहब पे एक यूटिलिटी है, वो यूटिलिटी यूज करके आप एन्क्रिप्शन पब्लिक की जनरेट कर सकते हो। मैं आपको भेज रहा हूँ लिंक उसका।
हाँ, यूटिलिटी मैंने देखा था एक्चुअली, क्या इसमें प्राइवेट की और पब्लिक की का था, और सेम मैंने यूज कर लिया है उसे, उसको पब्लिक की और प्राइवेट की तो जनरेट हो गया उसी के हिसाब से। मेरे पास एक नोड का मतलब कोड लेवल पे था, उस चीज को मैंने समझ के किया था, बाकी इंक्रिप्शन का कोई मतलब फॉर्मेट नहीं था, मे भी सेम हो या फिर कुछ
नहीं, वो
डिफरेंट।
X2551 में एन्क्रिप्शन और साइनिंग उसका अलग अलग एल्गोरिथम है।
ओके,
एक सेकंड में आपको बताता हूँ। यहाँ पे चेक कीजिए एक बार।
यस सर,
मैंने चैट विंडो पे पोस्ट किया।
इसे तो ब्रीफली पढ़ना पड़ेगा, अभी ऐसे समझ नहीं आ रहा, तो देख ठीक है सर, थैंक यू सर।
थैंक यू। आप ये भी देख सकते हैं X25519, बहुत सारी यूटिलिटीज हैं जिसको लेके आप ये ऐसे कीज जनरेट कर सकते हैं।
ओके,
ये है की एक्सचेंज फॉर्मेट फॉर एन्क्रिप्शन। Okay, any other questions from anyone? Okay, thanks everyone. Over to you, Chatrali.
Thank you, Supriyo. Thank you all the participants. I request all of you to fill up the attendance sheet once again so that we can send you the resources, presentations, and recording. We can send you the link of NP profile form. And we will also be able to send you the next calls detailed. Thank you so much for attending the call.